Our lives are laid out on a road of bumps, turns, struggles, and more. How do we respond? How do we endure adversity for learning and growth? I'm Aubrey Johnson, and we'll explore these questions and more on the road to rediscovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Road to Rediscovery. I'm your host, Aubrey Johnson. The Road to Rediscovery is about reflecting on life lessons to learn and grow from them, and of course, take it to the next level and help others who are struggling through dark times. Now, as you all know, on the Road to Rediscovery, we are very, very passionate about delivering quality content in every single episode. So if you like what you hear and you'd like to support, just visit roadtorediscovery.com/support. That's rediscovery.com/support. We'll even give you a shout out on a future episode. And as always, there's no obligation. We are truly, truly grateful for your listenership. My special guest is a professional ultra endurance athlete with 25 years experience running the toughest endurance events in the world. She's also a motivational speaker, a run coach, and a mindset expert. Over the years, she's had to overcome her own struggles with self-esteem, body image, depression, fear, and more. And on her podcast, Pushing the Limits, she covers running, health, nutrition, among many other things. She's even authored multiple books, including her newest book, Relentless, How a Mother and Daughter Defied the Odds, where she chronicles the amazingly tough journey with her mother suffering from an aneurysm and stroke, navigating through it all to return to a quality of life far from the dire prognosis of her doctors. We're going to talk about this journey and more. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me pleasure to welcome Lisa Tamati to the show. Hey, Lisa, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. I'm just so stoked to be on your amazing show. You're wonderful. I can't wait to dig in.
Well, thank you. I'm equally excited to dig into this conversation. So let's just start things off by sharing with the listeners your love of running. Like, how early and how did you get into running? In the very early stages of your life.
The funny story is, Aubrey, I'm absolutely hopeless as a runner. I have no talent, genetically speaking, and I was an asthmatic as a child, like in and out of hospital, very severe asthmatic. So I didn't have a great lung capacity, very small lung capacity, very poor VO2 max.
Oh wow!
And so what this meant is, I didn't really have any speed at all. But I was one of those kids that wanted to. I really wanted to please my dad, for one thing. My dad was this amazing athlete and in a real tough man, and really cool. He was a firefighter, and little girls want to impress their dad, right? So and he really wanted me to represent New Zealand in something. So as a kid, I was in gymnastics actually, and I did pretty well in gymnastics. I was doing okay, and then I sort of hit puberty, right? And puberty sort of hit me full in the face, and I grew too tall and too big, and and this was a time in my life when I was a young lady turning into a young lady, and getting curves as you do, and being told that I was fat. Basically, because gymnasts have to be tiny, they have to be small. They shouldn't be tall. I mean, I couldn't really do much about that. And all of these sorts of things, were going on in my teenage years, and so that really shaped me in a lot of ways, actually, because I was battling with my self-esteem, my body image. Being told every week by the coach that you're fat when you're not fat, and you're just a perfectly healthy young lady, all of that sort of stuff really sort of screwed with my mind and really sort of affected me. So at the age of 15, I gave up gymnastics, and that was much to the disappointment of my dad. My dad sort of was like, but you were just about to break through, and you were just, you were that close, and I knew that I wasn't, right?
Right.
And so that was like, oh no, what else can I do? And then I took up surfing. And I have two younger brothers, and we all started surfing, and we live in a beautiful place with great surf. And I was miserable at that too, Aubrey.
Really?
very, very passionate about it. I trained and I didn't really, and there weren't that many girls doing it. So I thought, wow, I might be able to be really good at this. But yeah, nah, I was not.
Yeah, you gave it a go.
I gave it a go for many years.
Yeah.
And then, so running wasn't even on my radar. Running was something that I did to try to stay fit and to keep my weight down, right? So it was never a passion or anything. It was more the thing that you had to do, right? And then along came in my this is now my early 20s, very early 20s, a young gentleman from Austria who was cycling through our country and on a bike tour, and he climbed our local mountain and got hit by an avalanche, and he was lost for 3 days, and he was, quite badly injured. And my mum had met him the day before he'd gone up the mountain and had said to him, "You be careful, young man, up that mountain. It's very dangerous." And so when he was lost and she was, like, "Oh my gosh, this poor young guy," and they found him, and he had a very badly broken leg, and it was lucky to survive, and so on. And so mum, being my mum, she raced up to the hospital to say, look after him and make sure that he had someone in New Zealand, because he was all on his own, to care for him. And so I was home from university on my summer holidays then, and I met this young man and we fell in love, and it was wonderful. He looked like Brad Pitt, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And I thought so, yeah. And we spent a number of years traveling around the world. So he was from Austria. I ended up going over to Austria. Yeah. And we cycled around many, many countries. We climbed mountains and kayaked and canoed and trekked everywhere and so on and so forth. Yeah. And this was I'd never been out of the country. But to make a very long story short, he was a very abusive person, and this turned into an abusive relationship, which was unfortunate. And very young, no reflection on who he is today, I'm sure. But as a young man, he had his own issues, and very controlling relationship. And so over time, we were very much in an isolated bubble, just the two of us, cycling around and doing our thing. And this became very insular, and I had no sort of help from outside. I was living in a foreign country. I didn't speak the language, for starters, so I was very isolated. I'd lost, back in those days, you couldn't just ring home, it cost a lot of money. There's no Skype back then. There was no Zoom. And this sort of culminated after 5 years. We ended up doing the crossing of the Libyan desert. This was a 4-person expedition across a military barred zone, so we weren't allowed to be there. Most incredibly beautiful desert on earth. And we were doing this. Now, this was the brainchild of a guy called Elvis, not Elvis Presley, and Elvis from Yugoslavia, actually a survival expert. And he'd dreamt of crossing this desert for 20 years. He'd been there 20 years earlier, and he wanted to do a complete crossing of this desert. And so he invited us along. And this was extreme. Like, we're talking 250 kilometers. So in miles, I don't know what that is in miles, 180 or something like that. Right. Bloody long way. And we had no outside help, no water en route. So we had to carry our entire water supplies. So we had backpacks. Well, the guys had 40 kilos. I had 35 kilo backpack. So that included 20 liters of water, which was our complete ration for the entire trip, right? And we had to carry that. And like, I weigh in pounds, I think, about 120 pounds or something, 125, so 58, 59 kilos. And so this backpack was 2/3 of my body weight, right?
Oh my goodness.
And I remember being in Cairo and putting this backpack on for the first time and going, oh my God, I am in trouble, like I could hardly walk across the bedroom. Oh my gosh. And so if I fell over or whatever, I could not get up. If I sat down, I couldn't get up without support. And this was a military barred area. So we had to hop on a bus, and we drove 12 hours south of Cairo to this little oasis. Oh my. We got out of this oasis, and then we had to disappear into the desert. Now, there was a military base there, and it was legal to go into the desert because this is on the border between Egypt and Libya, which wasn't really a safe place to be wandering around. And so we had to wait for nightfall, and we disappeared into the desert and started our trek. And we had to cover 45 kilometers a day, and with these huge, great backpacks and temperatures of around 40 degrees during the day. Excuse me. and in temperatures that were really cold at night, so you had this huge, big changes as you do in deserts. And we were meant to be doing a book, taking photos for a book. My partner was a photographer and he wanted to take the photos. And Elvis said, well, you can take the photos all you like, but we have to cover 45 kilometers a day, or we're not going to survive. So you have to keep up, right?
Right.
And so the boyfriend said, well, you're going to help me set up tripods and do this. And I'm like barely moving forward, right?
Yeah.
And so this ended up being a big, I can't do it. And him calling me useless, as he always did, and you're hopeless and you can't do anything and you're blah, 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 you blah.
Yeah.
And this was the first time we'd ever been with other people. And Elvis saw this and he was like, hang on a minute, you can't talk to her like that. That's not right,
Right. Yeah.
And she's already on the limits, leave her alone type of thing. And so it ended up for the next couple of days, this big, crash between these two alpha males, if you like.
Sure.
And I was in the middle. And it was a pretty rough ride. So we were walking 45K a day, extremely dehydrated because we only had 2 liters of water a day. So the dehydration started to hit really, really fast. Kids, don't do this at home, okay? This was really stupid.
Yeah.
And on day 4, the tensions in the group were just, huge. And to be fair, we were all suffering really bad from the dehydration.
Yeah.
If you can imagine, like your tongue swollen, your mouth dry all the time, you're just dying for water, and you can't drink during the day because it just sweats out. So you had to sort of take most of your ration at nighttime when it was cooler, so it could get into your cells and stuff.
Sure.
Anyway, so it ends up with this big fight between us, and the partner says to me on day 4, this is after a 5-year relationship, he said, "That's it, the relationship's over. I'm leaving," and he disappeared. Packed up his stuff and disappeared over the sand dunes. Now, at that point, I didn't know whether I was going to survive because we were really, really bad shape.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was going to survive on his own out there. There was no one to come and help.
No.
And of course, the emotional turmoil of my partnership, my partner is leaving me and I'm falling to pieces, as you do,
Yeah.
And then I'm like, hang on a minute, I can't fall to pieces right now. I'm in the middle of the desert and I can't afford to cry and I can't afford to lose all this emotional energy. I've got to. And so in that moment, Aubrey, I learned to really compartmentalize things, to be able to function and then put the grief, the sadness, the whatever was going to come afterwards, the mess, till later, because I owed it to the other guys, right, to get up and keep going, and I owed it to myself to focus all my energy on doing that. And so I learned to pull myself together, and I had to let him go. I had to let thinking, worrying, all of that sort of stuff go. And I focused solely, and I said to the other 2 guys, you're not going to have any more problems with me. I promise. We're just going to, and we made a great team, the rest of us. And we powered through the next 4 days, and we went through really tough times. And, it's all in my first book, Running Hot, that chronicles that whole story of how we nearly didn't make it, but we survived. But this was a turning point in my life, Aubrey, where I said, my self-esteem at that point was about as low as you can possibly get. I thought I was just useless and hopeless and never going to amount to anything. And, my boyfriend had left me. I was, the country that I was living in, I didn't want to go home because I felt like a failure. So I was in this limbo state. And it was a really low point in my life. And it was a point where and it took me a long time to get over it. But eventually I said to myself, no one's ever going to treat me like that again. And I am not that person, right?
Right.
And so I'm getting to the crux of your question, which was, how did you get into running? So it took me a couple of years to recover, both physically and mentally. I think mentally I'm still recovering, but anyway, the physical part, I had, a lot of damage to my kidneys and all the nerves in my upper body wouldn't work. And I was, pretty bad shape. When I recovered from that, I was reading in a magazine one day about a race called the Marathon des Sables. I was still living in Austria. And the Marathon des Sables is a famous ultra marathon in Morocco. And it was touted at that time as being the toughest race on earth. And it was 240 kilometers odd and across the Moroccan Sahara. And they had all the support. You had 9 liters of water a day. You had doctors. You had journalists. It was this big thing. And it was touted as the toughest thing. And I was like, hang on a minute, this is the same distance as what I did in the Libyan desert with no support. I get 9 liters of water a day. I don't have a partner who's telling me I'm useless all the time. I reckon I can do this, right?
Right, yeah.
And I'd never run a marathon or anything at this point.
Yeah.
But I just signed up for this. I had done a lot of trekking. I hadn't done any running much. I signed up for this race, and I managed to get sponsors. And I went down to this race, and it was just the most incredible experience of my life. It was tough, but it wasn't. Awesome. It wasn't like as tough as some of the stuff I'd done with the ex-partner.
Sure.
I was surrounded by people who were positive, and I was surrounded by everybody who was on the singular mission to get through each day, and how they would help each other, and we'd support each other and pull each other up when we were down. And we had this wonderful camaraderie. And there was, if you picture like 700 runners, now it's much bigger, but 700 runners from all around the world, and they're all in tents of 8 runners. And it was like the United Nations coming together on this big mission, right? It was just beautiful. And every day you're fighting through the sandstorms and the sand dunes and the dehydration and the, whatever. Yeah. But you get through, and your tent mates would be, picking you up and looking, telling you how wonderful. And I just blossomed in that environment because I just so needed somebody to tell me I was doing well, right?
Yes.
And so I just loved it. So I did that race. I did really well. I actually, I came in the top 10 woman of the race, and I was doing, which was pretty bloody good for a rookie, right?
Yeah. Very good. Thing. Excellent.
And the thing was, I still wasn't a great runner, but I just knew how to push, and I knew how to keep going over long distances because I'd done a lot of trekking and stuff. Right. And so after that, I was like, bring this on, man. I would give me the next ultra marathon. I'm out there. So from then I just was addicted, of course, to this experience and going one after the other. And 25 years later,
here we are. Man, that is tremendous. My goodness. I mean, to get indoctrined, I guess you can say, in your first endurance, the way you explained it in the desert, it was a double whammy, right? Because it wasn't just the natural elements of the heat and the terrain that was a challenge and obstacle for you, but the organizational obstacles as well, right? The battle zones and areas politically that are like not safe to be in.
Dangerous as heck.
So if you can take that plus the emotional turmoil that you went through, in losing your partner in that experience, then you take all that out of the equation for another endurance event, and of course you'll knock that one right out the park.
Yeah, but basically it was. I think it was as a rebirth in a way. It was like finally, and I started to through running, reconnect with who my confidence and start to build who I was, and it made me stronger. And you know what? When you go through these tough times, Aubrey, when you're in the middle of it, it's awful, right? It's awful. But when you come out the other side of it and you've had time to recover and to reflect on what happened and look back, everything is, you realize that made you tougher, stronger, more capable. And then the next challenge that comes along, you're able to handle that better. And this goes on. What doesn't break you makes you stronger, is the saying.
As the saying goes, right.
And it can break you, like there are things in my life that I've experienced since that have nearly broken me. And at times I feel quite, like there are little bits that are broken.
Yeah.
But I think, most of the time you come out stronger from these experiences, and it lifts your horizon as to what you're capable of. And then you risk a little bit more, and you lift your eyes, the horizon gets a little bit further away, and you can tackle another thing and another thing. And this translates fully over into business, over into your personal life, over into your relationships. And this is the value. Like, for me, running isn't about running. For me, running is about the road to rediscovery, really.
Love it.
It really is. The title of your show is a good analogy for that, because you are finding out who you are when you're pushing through these hard times, when you're having to overcome massive amounts of pain or whatever it is that you're dealing with, and you're keeping going. You find out who you are on the inside, and sometimes that can be so useful. Yeah.
Yeah. It truly can, and you are finding out who you are on the other side, as they say, right? It's tough to go through. And like you said, at the time that you're going through it, I'm sure there's many other places that
You want to
would
be.
prefer to be, right? So, but receiving that feeling in your heart and in your spirit on the other side, after pushing yourself, you've gone this far. Okay, how about a little further? How about a little further? How about a little further in increments, right? And realize, wow, I've come this far, way beyond anything I thought I was capable of. And it sounds like that's what you went
Absolutely.
through.
Yep.
Wow. So Lisa, I want for us to kind of quickly go through. I'd love to hear about Relentless and the story with you and your mother. And,
Yep.
and then I want to talk about the great work that you're doing in helping others as a mindset coach, and endurance expert.
Yeah, and health and stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So this is another bit of a big story. So,
Yeah.
So 6 years ago, my mum, who had been the rock of my world, the most amazing mother that you could possibly imagine, always supported me through all the crazy stuff that I'd done, and just a wonderful woman. And she had but she'd always put everybody else first, right? She'd always been that person who's didn't worry about her own health and fitness or anything, because she was always looking after her kids, even when even when they were 40 and 50,
Yeah.
And so unfortunately she had an aneurysm 6 years ago, and so when this happened, we had a medical misadventure from the get-go. So the ambulance driver who picked her up, she collapsed on the floor and taken her to the hospital. He thought that she was having either a stroke or an aneurysm or something neurological was going on, and he told the doctor this, but unfortunately the doctor decided to ignore it and thought she was having a migraine. And so for 6 hours I'm in the emergency room with my mum. My mum's in excruciating pain. I know that this is not a migraine. I knew it wasn't a migraine, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what to ask for. So I'm sitting there, and as you do when you're in the medical setting, you're sort of intimidated, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on. You're frightened. You've got someone who's really sick, and you think the doctors would know what they're doing, right? So you don't say anything, and you just hope someone's going to help you.
Right.
And this went on for hour after hour after hour, and I was getting more and more desperate. And then I thought, oh, hang on a minute. I've got my friend Megan, a lady who's a paramedic, a friend of mine, and she'd crewed for me all over the world and become an ultra runner herself. And we'd done lots of adventures together. And I said, can you please come up here? Because you know the hospital system, you know the people up here. They're not listening to me. Something's massively wrong. And so she raced up and she took one look at mum and said, oh, she's having a stroke or an aneurysm. There's something going on. She'd go straight to the doctor, and she's a very strong jiu-jitsu lady. So the doctor was told in no uncertain terms, you get this lady a CT scan now.
Right. Yeah.
Or else, and,
or else. That's right.
And so after 6 hours of waiting, we finally got the CT scan, and that came back with blood right throughout the brain. She'd had a massive bleed. And then they started to move. And of course, this was horrific for us. At that point, they were saying to me, look, we don't think she's going to survive. But we'll take her through to the Wellington Hospital, where we have a neurological unit, because in our small town we didn't have one.
Right.
And I remember my dad coming over to me and saying, we better start planning the funeral, and they've been married for 50 years. And And I remember grabbing my dad, as many as friends had done for me in ultra marathons when I was really, down and like I can't carry on type of thing.
Yeah.
And I grabbed my dad and I hugged him and I shook him and I said, Dad, this is not over. and I am not. I'm whatever. I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring her back. And here's the jobs I want you to do. So when people are in a stress and an emergency situation, you give them jobs, because that turns off that panic response, and you give them jobs to do. And I want you to get down to Wellington, get my brothers, get Auntie so-and-so, do this,
Yeah.
Oh, right. And so he jumped in behind me and, started to get everything organized, my brothers, and he, raced down to Wellington, and I stayed with my mum for the next 12 hours. We had to wait for the air ambulance because, when you're older, you often get bumped down the list as being not quite so important. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
it took 18 hours to get into surgery and to have a stent put in where they start to drain the blood off. And by now, massive damage is done to the brain. They don't think she's going to survive. Somehow she pulls through. The next couple of days, she's really touch and go, but somehow she's still going. She's in and out of a coma at this point. And because of this medical misadventure that I had at the beginning, I was like hyper vigilant. Like I am going to study everything and do everything in my power. If I get a second chance here, I am not going to waste it, was my prayer to the universe. And to, you know, and so I started studying everything I possibly could. And I was hyper vigilant, and we set up a 24-hour, you know, round the clock vigil with her. And much to the dismay of the hospital staff who tried to keep us out, no show. And I was not leaving her side because she could die at any moment, right? In which she was not going to be alone if that was going to happen.
Right.
And then the next few days, she started to go downhill because when blood and brain matter are mixed, it causes massive inflammation. So what you get at the beginning is not the whole story. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse, right? Okay. And so she started to go into a deep coma. And then after 3 days, they rushed her up into ICU. Why she wasn't there, I don't know from the first place. But in ICU, she had a lot more care. So it was 24/7 round-the-clock care. And in this time, I'm studying every drug they're giving her, what they're doing, all of the ops. I'm taking notes on everything. And I couldn't do much in this critical setting, right, except learn. And so I did, and I stayed by her, and I, you know, talked to her, and we were encouraging her and doing whatever we possibly could at that point, which wasn't a heck of a lot. These amazing doctors in the ICU managed to keep her alive and keep her going. And then she had to have a second operation. She survived that, but then she had another stroke on the right side. So now she was paralyzed on that right side as well.
Oh my.
After 3 weeks of this critical situation, she came out of the coma and she stabilized. And the doctors, they know that 3 weeks is a critical period for something like this, and it looks like she's going to survive. But then she had massive brain damage, so she had hardly any higher function. She was 74 years old, and she had no idea who I was, what I was.
Right.
She had a couple of single words that she could utter. She could move her left arm, but she couldn't really do it in any coordinated fashion. So massive brain damage, basically. And for the next couple of months, we were in the hospital system, and we were transported back to New Plymouth. And in this time, I started studying things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy and oxygen, what it does in the brain, and so on and so forth. And I'd done a lot of racing at altitude in the Himalayas, and I've had altitude sickness before. And I was seeing signs of altitude sickness in my mum. And so my brain started to work, and I started thinking, I don't think she's breathing when she's asleep. And of course she was sleeping 18 hours a day. And I said, I want a sleep apnea assessment. I don't think she's breathing. I think she's stopping breathing at night. When she's asleep. And they said, no, we're not doing a sleep apnea assessment. Why would we do that? So on and so forth. So I went and got an outside consultant, brought him into the hospital, smuggled him in one night, and we did this. We did this assessment, and it came back severe sleep apnea. Oh my! Her oxygen stats dropped at around 70%. So her SpO2, which is measuring how much oxygen, which is deadly, right? And you're knocking off whatever. You're knocking off whatever brain cells there were left to knock off, right? And so night after night after night, she's getting worse, right? And so after I showed them the reports, and finally they went, oh, okay, and they put a CPAP machine on her, and she started to have oxygen then 24/7 sort of thing around the clock. And so that was my first one. And after that, she started to have a little bit of a spark of something, you know? And then I had to fight to take her home, because when you're older, they want to stick you into an institution and be done with you, get you out of their budget. You know, that's the way it is. And so I had to really fight to get some resources to take her home so that I could look after her. Because in my mind, no one was going to do as good a job as my family was going to do.
Exactly.
You know?
That's right.
And I wanted her to know on some level, whatever there was of consciousness for her, that she was home, that she was loved, that she was surrounded by her loved ones.
That's right.
This was crucial, absolutely crucial to me. And they were like, she doesn't know anyway. Why are you worrying? And I was like, no, I want control of what goes into her. And I want control of her food. And I don't want somebody telling me, giving her sugary drinks and, when she's in a home, so I fought like crazy to get her home. And we had this massive big meeting where we had all the doctors and nurses and therapists that had working with her. And it's the family meeting. And we had this horrible social worker who was hell-bent on getting her out of his life and into this institution. And he's running the meeting, and he said, right, you will not speak until the end, and this is, the doctors are going to say their piece and blah, 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 and then you can ask questions at the end. And I'm sitting there with my brother. My brother looks like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's about as lookalike as like Dwayne Johnson. Okay. So he's sitting there, and I go to ask a question because the doctor said something, and I was like, because I was fighting for resources, is basically what was going on, right? And I'm fighting that she is going, I am seeing improvements, and they were saying she's never going to do anything. She's a waste of time, blah, blah, blah. And so I was having this conversation with the doctor, and the social worker says, you will not speak until the end and sit down. And my brother got up and he leaned across the table and he grabbed him by his shirt.
Oh, yeah.
And my brother is very intimidating.
Yeah.
And he did, you are going to sit down and shut up. And he used some other words, which we won't say here.
Yeah.
And from now on, my sister is running the meeting, and all of you are going to shut up and listen. And from that point on, I ran the meeting, and I got the results that I wanted. I got the resources that I needed.
Wow.
And it's not appropriate, but I will do anything to protect my family.
It's your family. Absolutely. I mean, wow, Lisa. I mean, just resilience, tenacity, determination, and a brother that looks intimidating, all key components, and a true testament to your will, your spirit, and it sounds like a lot of the mental toughness that was required for you to endure those ultra events and runs, through terrain, weather, wildlife.
It really started. And like I finally got a home, right, to finish the story. And the day I got home, I'd been studying hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which, by the way, people, if you have brain injuries, cancer, strokes, whatever, concussions, please check out hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It's a very underrated therapy because there's no money behind it. There's no pharmaceutical company behind it, but it is powerful. And so I went to a dive center of all places because they had one of these chambers, because they use it when divers get the bends, and they had to have it. And I begged these people to be able to use their chamber, and I, presented them some evidence and my situation. And these wonderful people said, yes, you sign a legal waiver, and, we'll make sure it's all safe. And so the day I got her out of the hospital, this very sick, fragile woman in a wheelchair is, like completely out of it, we taken down to this factory, stuck on a forklift and stuck into this chamber because that was the only way we could get her in. We did this for 33 treatments. Excuse me. 33 treatments of 5 days a week, hour and a half a day. Amazing what these people did for us. And after that 33 treatments, my mum was starting to respond. Like, she didn't just get up and walk, but she was starting to, like there was a flicker of trying to move her hands, trying to get up. Yeah. And she had a couple more words, and she was, I just like, oh my God, this is working. Yeah. And then I lost access because it had to be taken off on a contract. So then I went, oh God, obstacle, what do I do now? I need this chamber. It's obviously working. So then I mortgaged my house, and I bought a hyperbaric chamber, and I installed it in my house, all of which were not easy. And I put her through treatment after treatment after treatment, and a certain protocol that I'd studied from a Dr. Harch in America, who's an expert on this. And over time, my mum started to wake up and come back. And as she started to come back, I started to study everything else. So I studied epigenetics and functional genomics. I studied keto diet. I studied, supplementation. I studied physio. I studied, vestibular system. I studied everything I could possibly study. As I came up against obstacles, I stayed one step ahead of her in her recovery. We had no support. We had a couple of hours of support for the first few weeks from a neurophysio, and that was fantastic because he gave me some exercises at least that I could do. Yeah. But apart from that, we were on our own, and it took me, long story short, so she went from being this baby who couldn't sit, who couldn't put food in her mouth, couldn't chew, didn't know who she was, to a fully functioning, independent woman with a full driver's license, her full power of attorney back, going to the gym 5 days a week, walking 4Ks a day, hanging out with her family, back to full recovery in 2.5 years.
That's absolutely outstanding. I mean, back to the quality of life that she had, that she aspired to be, and that's through, again, your tenacity,
grit,
your determination, your grit, and willing to knock down walls, right?
Yeah, and like there were what I'm missing there is the thousands and thousands of hours of retraining her brain, and like so every day. And I would have months with no success and no progress, and people would say to me, "Why are you doing this? Why are you pushing her so hard?" Because it's not easy for her either. You've got to remember, this is really brutally hard training that she's going through because she's trying to reconnect her brain. So it's frustrating as heck, and it would be so easy for her to give up. But it took her a year to really work out that this has happened to her, like until she had enough consciousness to really know what was happening to her. But once she did, she decided, well, I'm going to fight too, and my family are all fighting with me. And I was running 5 companies at the stage because I'm an entrepreneur and I have different companies, and I was just running myself ragged. So I ended up nearly, killing myself in the process. Literally, I ended up in and out of hospital because I was working all day with her, and then when she was asleep, I was working on my companies and trying to keep everything going.
It's exhausting.
It's just I was exhausted, and I aged probably 10 years in that time. And in the mix, I decided to write a book about this journey, which is this one here, Relentless. I don't know if you can see that.
Very nice.
And that's my beautiful mum there on the cover. And that was a mission in itself, writing a book, which took me 2 years. But the thing was, I wanted to empower other families going through, doesn't have to be the same, medical thing, but this belief, because we often are told that you're terminal, or you're never going to recover, or that's it, you're done. And you know what? It's not true. They don't. It just means that doctor doesn't know. That doctor doesn't know.
Right.
If the rate of change and the rate of studies that are coming out and the research that's going on is more than any single person can ever be across. So if you have one particular ailment and you go and study that particular ailment for a month, you can be quite an expert by the end of it. Okay. So you can be way ahead of your local doctor who doesn't know about these things. And so what this has actually led me into now is that I now work with people. So I got qualified in epigenetics. I do DNA testing. I help people with health journeys, and I help people optimize their comeback, depending on what they're doing. And we also work, one of my companies works with, we have 700 athletes that we train all around the world in running. But then we also have this health coaching side to what we do, and I take on only a very few people because it takes quite a lot of resources.
Sure.
But I'm able to help people navigate the medical world, because while we have these beautiful doctors and people that are wanting to help us, we have to understand the limitations of our system and the way it's developed. And so the way it's developed is very much a pharmacological model. There is very much lacking on the whole health, holistic health, nutrition, or supplementation. All that side is just completely kiboshed in mainstream medical, and they're leaving a whole lot of stuff, like things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy are just underappreciated and not utilized. And why is that? Even though there's clinical evidence, and even though there's tons of studies and years and years and years of anecdotal evidence across so many things from cancer to brain injury.
Right.
Because there's no money in it. And so nobody is going to do the big clinical studies. There's been a couple of, smaller ones, but because these things cost mega amounts. And when there's no money at the end of it, there's no impetus for any company to take that up, because you've got to understand how, and that's not people even being evil. That's just, when there's no money why would you spend years doing clinical trials, something very difficult, when there's no reward day at the end? It's just how it is.
Yes.
So what people need to understand is that you need to take from conventional medicine, but then you also need what is the latest, because this is the other thing, Aubrey, is that from my experience, and I interview doctors, scientists all day long. That's what I do, my podcasts and stuff, and I've been doing that for 6 years. they without exception tell me, some say 17 years, some say 25 years, but between 17 and 25 years behind the latest research. That's what you'll get in the clinic. When you go to the hospital, to your local doctor, they're about 17 to 25 years behind what is actually the cutting edge. And that's because it hasn't, some of this cutting edge stuff hasn't gone through its trials, hasn't gone through. When you have someone who is dying or is in deep trouble, you do not have the luxury of waiting for clinical trials, and you have to do the best. Unfortunately, Aubrey, we're going through now a cancer journey with my mum. 4 or 5 months ago, she started to have another droop on the right side of the face, and I thought, oh my God, she's having a stroke. Rushed her into the hospital. They did a CT scan. They couldn't find anything, sent me home. I went back in 2 days later, massive high blood pressure. There's something massively wrong. She's not neurologically not doing what she normally does. I was sent back home. They ignored me. I fought. I managed to get an MRI, and the MRI came back and it showed this massive tumor on the left side of her brain and some other ones up the front. At that point, panic again. And I managed to get her under the top neurosurgeon in the country. He did the emergency operation to take the one big tumor that they could reach out, which was, a very big operation. We didn't know whether she'd survive. But incredible doctor and team. And they did it, and she came out of that, and then she started to improve. Now, I had her on hyperbaric oxygen every day. I had her doing intravenous vitamin C, so she bounced back from that operation really, really quickly.
Gotcha.
And then we came to the point where we knew that it was cancer when we got the diagnosis after the tumor was removed.
Gotcha.
And it's a lymphoma, and it was an aggressive B-cell lymphoma, terminal. And so all the doctors were saying to me, she's terminally ill. We could do high-dose methotrexate. That's the only thing that we could offer.
Gotcha.
But that's, that would kill her at her age. So get your affairs in order.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
I went to Mum. I said to Mum, as we came out of the offices of these doctors time and time again, I said, Mum, I want you to ignore what they said, and they don't know the whole metabolic approach to cancer. They don't know about all this other side that I know about.
Right.
Ignore it. And she says, of course I don't believe them. I've never right. They don't know you, and they don't know your team. And they just looking at what they have in their conventional toolbox and telling me I'm stuffed. They don't know the other side. And I was like, Mum, you're a legend. You're just a legend. Someone's just told you you're terminally, and you just go, whatever. So, gotcha. And I'm like going, fake it till you make it, right? Just oh my God, I'm like, now I'm responsible.
Keep reading,
again.
keep studying.
Keep reading, keep studying. Came across the metabolic approach to cancer, which is basically there's a book called How to Starve Cancer by Jane McClellan. That was my first road book, and I did her course in it, and it's all how to block the food supplies to the tumor. So things like sugar and carbs feed cancer. So if you are listening to this, if you have cancer, you should not be having carbs and sugar and things. And then there's glutamine, and there's lots of other pathways. There's a combination of off-label drugs that you can take that will block different pathways. And so this book is about how to starve the cancer without starving the person and what to give them. So we went a very strict keto diet, exogenous ketones. She's on about 150 pills a day, both supplements and off-label drugs like metformin, atorvastatin, mebendazole, doxycycline. These are all repurposed drugs that block all these different pathways. She's on a daily regimen of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which, we're lucky to have that. And she has 2 to 3 times a week, very high dose intravenous vitamin C. It was a very, hard, arduous routine, and she still has to train and do all the rest of it. In 8 weeks, though, before we even did anything conventionally, in 8 weeks, they did the MRI again, and the tumors were gone. Like, not just the one that they took out, but all the inflammation, the tumors were gone. There's some residual inflammation where the major tumor was, so we're still working on that. And then that was the last MRI. Now, we are not out of the woods, because cancer is a tricky beast that can shapeshift and change what. And so I'm still throwing immunotherapy into the mix. I've put a very mild form of chemotherapy into the mix, which we're on round 3. But one that I'd researched in conjunction with my 12 doctors that I work with. So I went out into the world. I've got a doctor, Dr. Lavali from Texas, Dr. Yurth from Colorado. I've got Dr. Hassami from Thailand. I've got Joe McClelland in England. I've got a doctor in Nelson. I've got doctors up the wazoo, right? and I have her under all of them. And why do I do that? It's because then I have a team of people who have different expertises, and they have developed different protocols, and they have different ideas. And then every time we have a milestone, I go back to all these doctors and I say, this is what's happening now. This is what's, wrong with their bloods, or this is what I'm seeing. What's your opinion? And then I take all of those opinions. So it's a full project management job, right?
Sure, it is. Yeah.
I get each of their opinions again on every stage of the process, and where they collide and where they agree on, and where that's the protocol that I then take and then use, right?
Right.
To the best of my ability, and using my own intuition. And I now have quite a big understanding of biochemistry and mechanism of action of different things. So I make that decision based on my clinical observation of her day to day and what I'm seeing. And, I'm chucking mud at the wall, and all of us are, in a way, because I can't look inside her brain every day to find out how am I doing. But I just have the approach of every day we do the work, every day we take these steps, and we do what needs to be done, and we stick to this very strict diet, which is really hard for her because she loves the food.
Yes.
But now, like she is back to walking and going to the gym and having her grandchildren around and loving life again. And she's back to her normal self, because before the tumor operation, she was gone. She'd regressed massively. So she was like a baby again. Yeah. So I've seen my mum go from being like a baby to an adult, being like a baby back to an adult. And this is at the age of 80, Aubrey. She's 80. Amazing. So you imagine if you have got a brain injury and you're 30 or you're 20 or you're 40 and you're listening to this, or you've got cancer, this is empowering stuff.
Oh, it is. Yeah. No.
And that's regardless of the outcome,
Oh, yeah. It's inspirational. It totally is inspirational, and you and your mother have come such a long way. And I have to commend you for your tenacity.
I love my mom.
And you love your mom. I mean, it's a daughter's love, right? And so, I understand you are not out of the woods yet. So, hopes and thoughts and prayers to you and your family for sure, Lisa. And I'm sorry, but as we wrap up, I want to ask you, how can the listeners learn more about you, connect with you, learn about the great work that you're doing and helping others, as well as listen to your podcast?
Yeah, thank you, Aubrey, for the opportunity. I really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to hopefully having you on my show. My website is just Lisa Tamati. It's TAMATI.com. You can put that in the show notes, perhaps. The book is called Relentless, and it is up on Amazon. It's called Relentless, How a Mother and Daughter Defied the Odds. And it's, these two ladies on the cover, a blue book. And I do work with people one-on-one. I don't work with a ton of people. My company, we also do epigenetic testing, and I love genetics, because when you understand how your genes work and what genes you have, then you can optimize your environment to them. This is not deterministic. This is why it's epigenetics.
Sure.
Epi means above. So this is like, okay, you got these genes, some of them good, some of them not so great. Right. But we can put you in the right environment, the right food, the right exercise, the right times of the day, the right circadian rhythms, the right environment for your brain, your work, all that. And then we can optimize you based on that information, right? And so I love the epigenetics and the DNA testing programs that I run. I think we're so lucky to live in a day and age where we can have a peek into our operating manual,
Yes.
And where up until now we've sort of been running without any knowledge of what our operating manual was all about. And now we have that, and we can actually put ourselves in the right environment to flourish and to live healthy, long lives. So I'm all about longevity. I'm all about anti-aging and optimizing what we have and never giving up. The mindset piece of the puzzle is also huge. I have a mindset course as well, an online course. So
nice.
Thank you. Yep. That's where everybody can find me. And I'm on Instagram, of course.
And on Instagram.
And YouTube. Okay. I have a big YouTube
channel.
Yep.
Okay.
So
we will Hey, we'll make sure and include all those links, the link to the book, the podcast, your Instagram, and your YouTube channel, and more, and your website on the episode show notes. So,
Thanks.
man, that's fantastic. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was truly a pleasure learning about you, connecting with you, and thank you for the insights that you've shared with my listeners based on your experiences.
Thank you, Aubrey. What you're doing is just a fabulous thing. So I really, really appreciate you and the work you're doing. And I feel like I've made a new friend.
Oh, likewise. I feel like I made a new friend as well. Lisa, thanks again. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. If you have a loved one or a colleague who appears to be down and out with no direction, no way to turn, they feel like they're at the end of their rope, I humbly ask that you share this show with them. And the reason why is because on the road to rediscovery, we want our listeners to know two things. Number one, you're not alone. And number two, there is always hope. The road to rediscovery, it's a movement, a revolution. And guess what? You are now part of it. We're all roadies on this journey of life. And it sure feels good having you on the road with me. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again soon. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Road to Rediscovery. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com and leave us any questions or comments you may have. The Road to Rediscovery is an AJ Shark production.